All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Marc Dupuis-Desormeaux, and I am the CEO of the Turtle Survival Alliance. I'm so glad to see that so many people are here today to learn about our planned reintroduction of 20,000 radiated tortoises in Madagascar. So you'll hear from our team in a few minutes, but first I wanted to welcome our host and MC, Dr. Bonnie Raphael. Bonnie has had a distinguished career as a veterinarian at the Bronx Zoo and the Dallas Zoo. She's been our TSA senior vet consultant for many, many years, and she's been closely involved with the Madagascar confiscation and return to health initiatives. She has trained numerous vet students and young vets to help with the processing of tortoises for the release back into the community forest. I'm so happy to have Bonnie as our MC today. Thank you, Bonnie, and over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Hello and welcome to everybody to this special webinar of the Turtle Survival Alliance. And it's great to see so many people joining from different countries. Thanks again, and thanks for your support of turtle conservation. As many of you know, the mission of Turtle Survival Alliance is to protect and restore wild populations of tortoises and freshwater turtles through science-based initiatives, global leadership, and local stewardship. And this year marks our 20th anniversary as a nonprofit organization. We've been on a wonderful journey of passion, innovation, commitment, and growth. And these efforts are really made possible by dedicated supporters like you. So thank you to all who've awarded generous grants or made a donation. No amount is too small to the Turtle Survival Alliance. You've supported initiatives to safeguard turtle species through field research, rescue, reintroductions, breeding, genetics, community outreach in over 15 countries. Today, we're working towards a future where turtles are once again thriving in the wild. So before we begin the formal presentations, I would just like to mention, please feel free to add questions to the webinar Q&A feature or the chat feature. I think you only have access to the chat feature at this point. We'll have a Q&A session towards the end of the program. I now have the honor of introducing our distinguished lineup of speakers who will be discussing one, if not the largest turtle reintroduction effort of previously confiscated animals, with the goal, as Mark said, of returning 20,000 radiated tortoises back to the wild over the next 5 years. So joining us today to talk about this extraordinary journey in the Turtle Survival Alliance is President Emeritus Rick Hudson, Country Director in Madagascar, Hery Razafimamonjiraibe, and 2 incredible biologists and ecologists and our reproduction specialists, Bartek and Lance Paden. So without further ado, please welcome Rick Hudson.
Thank you, Bonnie. We got the slides going. There we go. Next slide. So a little bit of background. I made my I made my first trip to Madagascar in 1991, and it really set the hook. Madagascar's been in my heart and soul ever since, especially the tortoises. I fell in love with the people, the culture, everything about this magical place. And though I'm trying to retire, Madagascar simply won't let me. So this project is very special to my heart. Next. Madagascar, as most people know, is a biodiversity hotspot. It is a megadiversity country. Most of the wildlife and plants there are found nowhere else on Earth. 90% of the wildlife is endemic, and this includes the lemurs, for which the island is best known. It's the 4th largest island in the world, situated in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Africa. Poverty is exceptionally high, especially in the south, and this poverty really helps drive the poaching crisis that we're now seeing, that is driving the radiated tortoises to closer to extinction. Next. Radiated tortoise is now ranked critically endangered by the IUCN. And when on my first trip to Madagascar, we saw so many radiated tortoises, over 100 in a day sometimes, and I couldn't understand why they were ranked endangered. Well, that situation has radically declined, and I'd say that the situation now can best be described as catastrophic decline. This was once one of the most abundant tortoises on Earth. It is now gone from about 75% of its range, and its population decline is at least 80%. And much of that has been in the past 20 years, which is really disturbing. And, back in 2010, next slide, 2010, we recognized this. We started seeing, huge stockpiles of tortoises in garbage dumps in towns, and we realized that, action had to be taken. This is typical Madagascar thorn scrub vegetation. You have baobabs, dideria, octopus plants, a lot of spiny forest. As Brett and Lance will tell you later, working in this habitat is brutal. Everything there hurts you. Next. That's what typical habitat looks like. This is what Madagascar looks like now. About 90% of the spiny forest has disappeared, has been cleared for cultivation, burnt. And much of the habitat is agricultural fields now, and invaded by Opuntia or prickly pear cactus. And this is, this is just pervasive in the area. Despite all this, the radiated tortoise can make a living. Can be quite abundant in these disturbed areas. So that is not the habitat loss is not solely the issue. Poaching is. Next. Poaching is best described as driving a systematic extermination of the species across its range. And at the current rate of decline, we predict that this population or this species will be functionally extinct in the wild within 20 years. And we've just seen a huge escalation of poaching recently. This may be an optimistic estimate. Poaching surged on us in 2015. We started seizing a lot of tortoises at the airport, but then in 2018, it really peaked. Next. So the big picture issue is we have to be able to control poaching. We've seen that, large numbers of adults are being harvested for bushmeat by outside tribes. The juveniles are being collected for the pet trade. This is like a 1-2 punch. Removing both size classes from a population really leaves it no potential for recovery. So this is what's going on. We have to be able to reintroduce the animals we have. We have 25,000 animals in captivity, which could reseed and recover populations. We have to be very strategic about how we do it, and we have to put them into safe areas, which we'll describe later. So survival of this species really is going to depend on protected areas, both at the national and the community levels, and we have to improve enforcement capacity. Those are the big pictures. Next. All right. Well, how do we get here? Why do we have so many tortoises to get back on the landscape? In 2018, our world changed, and most of us that were involved in this will never forget, this crisis. 10,000 radiated tortoises seized in a single home in Tulier. It's a record number for tortoises ever. I mean, that's the largest confiscation of tortoises ever. When we first heard it, we said, that can't be right. There's a decimal place off or something. It can't be that many. Well, it was. And so this eventually rapidly became TSA's finest hour. Over 3 months, we deployed 7 teams of wildlife warriors to Madagascar to deal with this, to rehabilitate, save these animals. The response was made possible by just an amazing outpouring of support. I've never seen the global turtle community come together in such a overwhelming fashion. Zoos, privates, NGOs, everybody supported this group. It's 500 donors, 70 organizations. It was an amazing feat. Next. Well, no sooner had we caught our breath from that one than a second confiscation of 7,000 tortoises happened. So just when you thought things couldn't get worse, they did. In response to that, the Lova Tortoise Center literally rose out of the desert in 2018. We were building this center while we were moving tortoises there. So this happened very rapidly. And of course, we've been involved in improving this center ever since that time. And we have another major tortoise center, the Tortoise Conservation Center, that we opened in 2014. All total, we've got about 23,000 tortoises there now because we started the reintroduction process, getting some back from the landscape. Next. The demands of caring for that many tortoises are amazing. I mean, it's burdensome. It requires a lot of money. It requires a lot of resources in terms of staff. We have over 50 staff members taking care of these tortoises. We have communities that are engaged in helping provide food. It's a huge demand on our budget. I don't know. We've been able to sustain this, and I want to call out USAID here because during COVID, many of our donations dried up, and we were struggling financially. USAID supported this project for 3 years during COVID and really helped us survive. Next. This is what a typical, this is the Lavavulu Center, typical tortoise enclosure. There's a lot to take care of. We've got a lot of shade structures, solar power. There's just, these facilities are money pits, but they are, despite the numbers, I'm really, really proud of the level of care and husbandry we're delivering here. So I think we've done a great job of training staff. And if you go there, you're going to be very impressed with our Malagasy staff and the level of care they're delivering. Next. So by 2020, there were 26,000 radiated tortoises under our care. And that population number, that's simply not sustainable. And so we are really embarked on trying to get these animals back on the landscape. And that takes a long time, which we'll discuss later. Next. So to do this and to deal with the crisis we've been dealing with since 2010, we have developed a pretty remarkable series of infrastructure and facilities in the South. We've got 5 small rescue centers, 2 large tortoise conservation centers, and then 2 reintroduction sites where we invested quite a bit of resources and infrastructure. And then keep this place in mind, Cap Sainte-Marie, which in the very south is a protected area, like probably the most important in Madagascar for radiated tortoises. And we have just entered into an agreement, a partnership agreement to help manage that park. So this is all tied in together. We'll talk about it later. Next. And now I think I'm going to turn this program over to Hery Lova, Razafimamonjiraibe.
Yeah. Thanks, Bonnie and Rick, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Next slide, please. As mentioned by Rick before, most of our intervention sites are located in the southern Madagascar, mainly in 2 regions, Atsimo-Defana and the Andrew region. We have long-term care facilities there and also triage centers. Southern Madagascar is the natural habitat for radiated tortoise. The climate is semi-arid, and the average rainfall is less than 600 millimeters per year. Unfortunately, the rainfall is fully distributed throughout the year, and water is really scarce. The southern region of Madagascar is also difficult to access. Roads are in very poor condition. Moreover, most of the areas have no access to electricity nor telecommunication networks. Next, please. Southern Madagascar is also characterized by dry and spiny vegetation, as said before, and are listed among the most important ecological regions in the world. It is home to numerous unique animal and plant species, with one of the highest endemism levels of the island. Next. Unfortunately, southern Madagascar is among the poorest regions, where drought and food insecurity are chronic. Its population faces the challenge of persistently high poverty rate. And according to the statistics, over 1 million people face acute food insecurity there, and more than 400,000 children under 5 are likely to suffer from acute malnutrition. Next, please. The main ethnic groups living in these 2 regions are Maafali and Tandrui. Maafali literally means people who know the taboo, and Tandrui means people of the thorns. They are among the ethnic groups that have most preserved their cultures and traditions in Madagascar. And one of the specificities and strengths of these ethnic groups is the presence of taboo and its respect. The case of a tortoise taboo is a perfect example, where even though southern region is confronted with periods of drought and severe food insecurity, Mafal and Tandu peoples have never consumed tortoises. In the culture and beliefs, tortoise bring rain. It's because of the taboo that tortoises still survived in the wild up to now. Unfortunately, people from other regions and other ethnic groups don't have this taboo on tortoise and are the main consumers and traffickers of this species. Next. Due to the law enforcement efforts illustrated by the example Rick told before, many tortoises were seized during the last 10 years. Next. And as the main organization entrusted by the Malagasy government to take care of the seized tortoises, we have now more than 25,000 tortoises at our centers. And all of these tortoises came from confiscations in collaboration with law enforcement officials. Partnership with communities are really essential in order to ensure the caring of the animals. That's why TSA employs local staff in majority. Next. Now, as we move on to the reintroduction of these tortoises in their natural habitat, we need to know that to release tortoises back into the wild, many conditions are necessary, such as the selection of a good release site, where the habitat can support the reintroduced tortoises, action of the animals and their habitat. Tortoises also undergo health screening before being safely released at the reintroduction site. And to date, 4,000 tortoises have been released into their natural habitat in Andrui and the Tsimandrefana regions at a rate of around 1,000 tortoises per year. But from this year onwards, our objective is to reintroduce 4,000 tortoises per year. Thanks to the data resulting from the reintroduction and the ecological monitoring carried out over the last few years, we are ready to respond to the challenges. I'll now hand over to Brett and Lance for more details on the reintroduction and monitoring activities and the result achieved so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Hery. So as everyone's kind of talked about so far, Lance and I got involved with this when we kind of got a phone call and were asked to help coordinate the effort to get these 26,000 tortoises into the wild. Here's a photo of one vehicle transporting tortoises to one of the release sites, just to get an idea of what the situation is looking like. I know Rick has already shown photos of pens full of tortoises, but 26,000 tortoises is an unbelievable amount of animals, and you really don't understand how many animals it is until you're standing on the ground looking at pens and pens and pens and pens, just packed full of tortoises. So in the past, there have actually been several groups, some of which have had some TSA support, that have tried releases within the natural range of these animals. And there's been mixed success. A lot of that success has had to do, or mixed success has had a lot to do with either unreliable data, maybe they didn't follow up and monitor the tortoises post-release as much as they should have, or they didn't monitor the tortoises post-release at all. So we really don't understand how the releases worked, or if they worked, or what the survivorship of these animals were, or anything like that. So you can go to the next slide. So our job was to kind of come in and come up with a method to actually assess the success of the translocation of these individual animals, 26,000 tortoises. So we created an intensive monitoring process or developed an intensive monitoring method to follow these tortoises around and determine if the site fidelity was similar to what the native tortoises or the resident tortoises were doing. To do that, we actually attached GPS loggers and radio transmitters to not only some of our translocated tortoises, but also tortoises that already lived in that forest. That way we can actually compare and contrast their movement patterns and their home ranges and what these animals are doing, or if they even stay where we wanted them to stay, or if they just ran off into the bush and disappeared. You can head to the next slide. So like I said, we've had several yeah, so we had to come up with a way to determine whether these releases were successful or not. So we came up with uh, three criteria. First, we wanted to make sure that the majority, if not all, the tortoises we released survived. Second, we wanted to make sure that they stayed where we put them and didn't run off out of the forest and where we're not going to be able to protect them. And finally, we want to make sure that there's long-term community support to make sure that nobody comes into these protected areas and continues to poach tortoises. You can go to the next slide. So the way we decided to do this was to base our methods off of how gopher tortoises are translocated around the southeastern United States. We do this by using a soft release methodology where we create a pen in an area that we want these tortoises to stay, and we acclimate these tortoises to their new home range by keeping them in the pen for a period of time. And that period of time is not really known for radiated tortoises because nobody's really done enough research to understand or monitor the tortoises after release to understand how long these tortoises need to acclimate to a new environment before they get released. So we aimed for 6 months, and we've done release timing anywhere between 9 and 3 months. So we're going over the data now to determine the success rates for all that. But so far we have everything looks really good, and Lance will talk more about that here in a few minutes. But for now, what our general methodology is we have a 20-acre pen located out in a protected forest where we're dropping 1,000 tortoises into and leaving them for approximately 6 months before finally releasing them into their new home range. Next slide. So at this point, we have fully released 3,000 tortoises over the last 2 years. We've released 2,000 at one site, and we've released 1,000 at a second site. And at this point, the first cohort that we released, or the first group that we released, was 1,000 tortoises in 2022. And we've now been monitoring those animals for 2 years. And we now have the largest data set of movement patterns and home ranges of radiated tortoises that have ever been collected. And this also includes the wild radiated tortoises that we put equipment on. Here's a photo of one of the tortoises with our equipment on it. You can see the radio transmitter right there in the front, and then on top we have our GPS logger. We've now collected data from 80 of our translocated tortoises and 20 wild tortoises, and that number is just going to continue to go up. Next slide. So this is a photo of us following one of our tortoises out to one of the agricultural fields that are just outside of our protected forest. Again, we have 2 sites. We've released 3,000 tortoises, and it is the largest data set on tortoises in the world. Next slide. So just this month, over World Turtle Day, we released another 1,000 tortoises into an acclimation pen at our first protected site in the Atsimo-Androfana region. This is a really good start to getting our foot in the door in this region. We've struggled finding protected areas in this region for a while, but we finally found a community that's excited to work with us, is already protecting their forest. And I think we're going to be really successful working with this community, and that's going to bleed off into other communities as well. They're going to see the benefits that Hery's going to talk about a little later, um, uh, why we're working or why the communities want to work with us and what they're getting out of this as well. Go to the next slide. That's a photo of those 1,000 tortoises that were released into the acclimation pen within the community protected forest. Prior to getting dropped into the pen, these tortoises have to make a pretty long ride in the truck, as you saw earlier. So of course, we make sure that all these animals are hydrated and water before they get dropped into the pen. Next slide. Coming this October, I'll be making a trip over there and attaching equipment to some of these animals. And hopefully in November, we'll be getting these animals released into the wild. And we'll be able to follow them around and see how they're reacting to their new environment. Next slide. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Lance, and he's going to talk a little bit about what we've learned so far. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett. So what have we learned in 2 years of monitoring this first 1,000 tortoises that were reintroduced in particular? And when I say we, it's not just Brett and I. We have an amazing team of TSA staff that are based out of the TCC right now that do a lot of the radio tracking for us. And this photo on the screen here is showing some of the TCC staff tracking some of these reintroduced tortoises, as well as one of the community members that joins us, being any TSA folks in the field at these reintroduction sites. Anytime that we go, they become invaluable at knowing the way around the landscape, acting as guides, and helping radio track tortoises. And it's also a community affair at pretty much all levels. These reintroductions are very important from that aspect. And you can see a couple ladies were out collecting cactus fruit, as well as a young boy that was interested in what we were doing. Next slide, please. So what basically the most important thing that we've learned so far is these soft release pens are working, and they're working pretty well. At this point, we're really as Brett mentioned, trying to define what methods are optimal for reintroducing radiated tortoises, and that has a lot to deal with how good a quality of vegetation are in these areas that we're setting up these soft release enclosures, how big are the pens for how many tortoises we're placing in them, as well as the seasonality of pinning and the release timing seems to be really important. So those are critical to know. Next slide, please. We've also found in 2 years now of monitoring these tortoises that the reintroduced tortoises are doing really well overall, I'd say. We're not only once they're released, but prior to release, even when they're in the pens, we have teams that are collecting morphometrics and weight data that's helping actively guide when the pen walls need to be removed, allowing tortoises to disperse into the surrounding spiny forest habitat. In 2 years of tracking, we've seen that mortality is fairly low. We tracked 35 tortoises from the first 1,000 that were placed at this site. And in 2 years, we've only lost one of those to predation. So that's actually pretty good. Next slide, please. So as Brett mentioned, we've collected a massive data set of GPS points as well as radio tracking data that we'll be pouring over in the next couple weeks here, because I'll be doing a presentation at the conference TSA is having in Tucson soon. So I'm going to have a lot more information about what sort of movements we're seeing these reintroduced tortoises doing compared to resident tortoises at these sites. And this is really important because these reintroduction sites are pockets of good habitat surrounded by communities that have good attitudes towards helping conserve tortoises in their area. So we really want to see that tortoises are staying close to where we place them. And the information we get from this will help guide future site selections and timing of release based on all of this movement data that we're amassing. Next slide, please. And I would say one of the most humbling things that we've discovered in 2 years of doing this post-release monitoring is just how little we know about radiated tortoises, wild tortoises as well as reintroduced ones. Our teams are regularly making important natural history observations just by being trained scientists in the field to recognize when something's unique and worthy of scientific note, essentially. And then they're also discovering what types of habitats these reintroduced tortoises are seeking out. If they're homing in on certain types of areas, that'll also help guide what types of reintroduction sites we prioritize and how large of sites we want to continue working with. Here in this photo, we have a tortoise that has not only the GPS logger and the radio transmitter on it, but also a little eye button which records hourly temperature data. So we now have about 45 tortoises in the field collecting hourly temperature data that we'll eventually use to compare how resident tortoises and reintroduced tortoises are behaving in a thermoregulation capacity. So next slide. And finally, it's really important that these communities that we've worked closely with now for several years, if you include the pre-release time, they're very eager to continue working with TSA into the future. We work with a lot of community appointed forest guardians that go radio tracking with us every single day. We're out there and conduct surveys with us, and that alone is very encouraging from a reintroduction standpoint that the community is behind us. So anyhow, that's what I have, and I'll pass that on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Brett.
Yeah.
Communities are really critically important to our success here. Next slide. I've often said, or it's been said, that next slide, the battle to save species will be won or lost at the community level, and nowhere or for no other species is that more true than the radiated tortoises. Engaging communities is really the key here, because communities that are empowered and incentivized are our first line of defense against poaching. They're our eyes and ears. Southern Madagascar is very rural. There are few towns that support gendarmes. So the gendarmes are very distant from the site of poaching. When we detect a poaching site, we have to go and get the gendarme. So it's a very, there's not a lot of enforcement capacity in the South. Next. I get asked this question all the time. That's an interesting photograph there. That shows our community outreach center with people, villages, communities nearby the Tortoise Conservation Center delivering greens and cactus during the drought. And the drought of 2020 was horrendous. People were dying, cattle were dying, plants were losing their leaves. It was hard to. It was just horrific. Southern Madagascar became the poster child for climate change. But anyway, despite the fact that these communities were struggling, they managed to get vegetation to us to feed our tortoises. So we've invested in them, and they're certainly rewarding us. understanding their needs is really difficult. Tangier culture is complicated, and it requires time to understand, what their needs are, the circumstances they're living under, their motivations. So it takes a long time. And, I get asked this all the time. Why does it take so long? Why can't you just take them out and release them? If we want to turn them back to the poachers, that's what we do. We have to develop these relationships and establish community protected forests if we're going to save this species. And that relationship has to be mutually beneficial. What are they going to get out of this? And so we're constantly looking. Next slide. We're looking for ways to improve their livelihood. And Hery, I'm going to turn this slide to you to discuss this.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Local communities support TSA in all its activities, from feeding the tortoises. We have an average 30 tons food for tortoises per month. But also communities support TSA for the release and for protecting the tortoises in the wild. We have a network of village volunteers. They're working with us, detecting poaching directly on site, and they even help officials, law enforcement officials, when catching the perpetrators. So yeah, they are really involved in all our activities, but the key is that we need to know what they need. And if we ensure to tackle their needs, they can be really not only involved, but dedicated in fighting against poaching and trafficking. So yeah, TSA also support the construction of basic infrastructure, such as school, offices at the really village level. We also provide means of transport to facilitate patrols in community managed forest. We also train them, building their capacity to do their work in protecting the habitat. So yeah, we really support communities, and we have a good collaboration between the law enforcement officials and communities at the village level. That's one good thing that we have. Next slide. This is one school that we built, and for this school, more than 50 children benefit from it. So it is really in a remote area. Next slide.
I'll talk about this program a bit. Community informants are working with the gendarmes in a new relationship that kind of represents a paradigm shift. These are two sectors that traditionally did not cooperate, did not get along. Now we are seeing that shift, and this was all funded by Fish and Wildlife to kind of build on that shift and to try to encourage a stronger working relationship between these two camps. The person at the bottom here, Tirandraze, is absolutely fearless. He is an amazing warrior for anti-poaching, and he's not afraid to take on poachers. And but I said we have to go and get the gendarmes from the nearest village, bring them to the site of the crime, and then do the enforcement. Next. The gendarmes are really poorly resourced. I mean, without TSA being there to provide transportation and support, they would not be able to reach the site of the crime. So that's just how poorly things are resourced there, and that's kind of a role we've accepted since dating back to 2010. Next. We recently entered into an agreement, a partnership agreement with Madagascar National Parks to help protect this site. This is Cap Sainte-Marie. This is the southernmost site in Madagascar. There's a big lighthouse there, as you see. It's an amazing, dramatic, windswept landscape, home to the largest population of tortoises in Madagascar. We've seen increasing poaching from this reserve in recent years, especially during COVID, because the local communities were not being rewarded or not being paid to remove invasive species, and so we got involved, and our goal is to improve surveillance of the park, to make sure that poaching is stopped. We want to improve relations with the local communities, but this is really going to be ground zero. If we can't draw a line in the sand around this protected area, then we will certainly lose this battle. But I'm really optimistic about our potential here and what we hope to achieve. Next. Protected forests are critical. And, we talk about national protected areas. Within the range of the tortoise, there's only two. One in the Tanjoy region, which is Cap Sainte Marie, which you just saw. The other is Lac Sinamapetsua in the Andrew, or in the Razafimamonjiraibe region. It's huge. It's a very large park, but it's very poorly protected. It's too large to really protect well. So we need to really improve enforcement at both of these protected areas. We need to increase the number of protected areas at the national level. So in the meantime, community protected forests are really, really important. And we have helped these communities, develop draft agreements and get their communities officially recognized by the regional government, so that where they have the stance to actually enforce protection. And it helps them. We've helped define the boundaries. Brett uses his drone to help define the boundaries of the protected area. We've developed a very close relationship with these people. And I love this picture because it illustrates some of the resources that they derive from forests. I mean, besides beekeeping and other things that they can extract from the forest. This is a picture that Lance took of one of our village or community volunteers who had just found these huge insect larvae encased in these egg cases or cocoon cases. And he was so happy because they stopped immediately, built a fire, and roasted these things and ate them. But that's just an example of how these forests are important to these communities. Next. We have a lot of sponsors for this program, but I want to take this opportunity to recognize our really large ones. So the Reintroduction program got underway with support from AZA grants, AZA SAFE grants. We're now working on our second round of SAFE grants that supports the Reintroduction program. Disney helped us kick off that work at the same time. I have mentioned USAID previously and all the support they gave us over 3 years. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife helped support over 2 years our enforcement program, which has really gotten off the ground with that support. But our main partner there is the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development. That is who we work under, and they've been very, very supportive partners. They don't have a lot of financial resources to offer, but they certainly provide us the cooperation and support we need at the national level. Next. And this was taken from our magazine. These are main. We've had a lot of supporters over the years. These are our more recent donors in the past 2 years. I hope I haven't overlooked anyone, but we extend our gracious support to all these people that help sustain this program. This program has grown larger than what we are capable of sustaining, and so that's why we've launched this campaign. We need help. We need support. Many of you joined us on this journey back in 2018 when the big confiscation first happened. We're trying to reignite that spark and try to bring this community back together to help us get these tortoises back on the landscape. I can't reinforce enough how much we need your help. We've done a good job so far, but the program is getting bigger than what TSA can handle, and we're going to have to bring together a lot of partners if we're going to win this battle. Next. So how can you help? We hope to have volunteer events starting in 2025 and do some major tortoise roundup events at one of our two tortoise conservation centers. We hope that people will volunteer to join us on those. We always need ambassadors to promote the work we do. Any we've got plenty of materials that you can use to promote our events. If you want to have an event to help raise money, we can provide the materials to help with that. Make a gift. We need sustainable income to keep this program going. So, we rely a lot on big donors, but don't underestimate the strength that small donors can make by making a sustainable and repeatable monthly donation. Okay, next slide. All right, I think I'm going to turn this over to Jordan or Ratcher, whoever's handling the Q&A section. We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I think since we're going to have a lot of questions, and we welcome those. We hope we can explain better what we've been doing. Thank you all for joining us.
Yep. Bonnie, I think you'll be moderating the Q&A, and there's been a lot of questions. And
Roger, please feel free to find them in the document.
Yeah, we'll try to get to as many as we can. One question is for anybody, and maybe for you, Bonnie, is like, how do you make sure that these tortoises will survive in the wild? We saw some of the prepping examples, but are there other things?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of specific questions regarding this that I'm happy to address, such as how do we make sure that the animals are healthy so that they can survive and that they don't introduce diseases to the wild animals. And we have a very intensive pre-release veterinary program that goes on. Once the animals have been selected for release by size and overall nature, then the veterinary squad comes in, so to speak, and does sampling for infectious diseases, make sure the individual animals are healthy weight-wise and attitude-wise. And we do put individual identifications on them during that time. We take blood samples, we take swabs. We have helped establish and upgrade a veterinary lab in the capital city so we can run many of those tests in country. And once we've done all our testing, then the animals are held in a somewhat isolated area, and they wait for then Brett and Lance to do their magic with the soft release pens. And that's the second major portion of how we assure that healthy animals are getting released, is that the soft release pens where they're held. Brett and Lance and their team from the local villages weigh and measure and make sure that these animals are maintaining their weight, and if they're not, they would not be candidates to be actually released to the wild. So everything goes into specifically to trying to keep them and the wild animals healthy. I hope that answers your question a little bit. Reggie, you want me to go on and ask some of the rest of these?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah, the reproduction specialist from the San Diego Zoo is asking whether there has been reproduction seen in released cohorts. Brett or Lance, could you answer that?
We have not seen reproduction yet. The majority of the animals that we're releasing are subadults. Hery mentioned in the comments actually a little earlier, we've actually chosen to release subadults for a very specific reason. Poachers are targeting two very different size classes of animals. They're targeting the very small and they're targeting the very large. So by releasing subadults, we're actually hoping that poachers are less likely to be interested in picking these animals up. So because, again, they're subadults, we haven't actually seen any reproduction in them yet. Some of them are getting to the size where they're probably able to reproduce, especially some of the male animals, but the females are definitely not large enough yet. I hope that answers it.
Here's an interesting question. The tracking instruments that are put on the turtle's carapace, do they allow the turtles to mate when they get to be that age? I.e., is the male getting on the female to work around the tracking instruments?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. That's actually where we place the GPS logger is the biggest piece of equipment that you see in those photos, and we're placing that on the front end, the anterior end of the carapace. That way, male does not get like pushed off from having that on top of them, and I'm have no doubt the males will make it work once once they get to that. So.
Yeah. In working with the two ethnic groups, how do you assess with the and what is your interaction with them that assures that there is buy-in from the local villagers with those two groups? That would be Lancer or Brett.
Gonna say maybe Hery has a better, because a lot of that comes in at the earlier planning stages for site selection.
Yeah, that's why we're involved in the community since the beginning of the work. When we assess the site, we involve the community in this assessment. And when we do all the work related to reintroduction and related to ecological monitoring, community members are always involved in these activities. And moreover, we listen to them, we listen to their needs. And I think someone asked somewhere if we rank water. So water is the first thing that the people need in the south of Madagascar. So that's why we built a school, and we also built basin to retain water when it is the rainy season. So that we have this approach by transforming the involvement into dedication. And I like the example that Rick told before with one guy who is really involved in fighting against poaching. He is native to this region, and he is really dedicated in fighting poaching and trafficking. And to illustrate more, several years ago, if poachers are arrested and prosecuted, no one wants to go at the court level to be a witness. But since last year, for each prosecution, we have witnesses from villagers. So I think that's a good example to say that they are not really dedicated to the work, not only involved. Thank you.
That's great. That's really good to hear. What do you think from a biology standpoint is important about radiated tortoises and the ecology of southern Madagascar, aside from the cultural importance to the people? Rick or Brett?
So this was actually a big discussion that we have pretty much every time we go over there. We really don't understand that yet because there really hasn't been enough research on this species. We do know that historically they've existed in very large densities and very large numbers. So it's very possible that, these animals could help reduce fire by eating a lot of the understory plants and picking up a lot of the leaves on the ground. They're probably seed dispersers. We've seen them eat pretty much anything and everything out there. And there's probably more than that. If they existed at the densities that they did, their young and eggs were probably a large food source for several species. We know a lot of species eat young turtles and turtle eggs. So we really don't understand what the ecological value of this species is, but I think we're learning that as we go.
And we have a question on do you have an idea what the optimal density is? Speaking of how dense they used to be, but how do you make your decisions on how many animals to release in a given area?
So that's been kind of a big question for each site that we've worked with so far is very different in terms of vegetation and habitat. We get a pretty good idea looking to see which size classes are still on those sites, just judging from our short-term surveys that we're able to do it when we're there. But there's also been some other more vigorous line transect surveys that are conducted earlier in the process that identify and rank sites based on how many tortoises were observed during those surveys. So I don't remember the exact rates. Do you, Brett, which stocking densities we use from the pens?
I don't know. I know we're putting 1,000 tortoises in an eight hectare pen, which is about 20 acres. Our first pen was 6 hectares, which is about 15 acres, and we deemed that was too small, so we bumped it up to 8 acres. But yeah, yeah, as Lance is saying, we have a lot of questions on densities as well. I think we're trying to keep densities low at the moment because we don't really understand what densities they should be at, and also a lot of the areas around these forests and communities we're working in are not protected, and poachers are still operating in those areas. So we don't want to add too many tortoises to the forest so that they start moving out to find new resources into areas where they're not protected.
How old are these animals that are being released, do you think, on average?
I would guess 10 to 15 years old on average, maybe older. It's hard to say because they've grown quite a bit since they came into captivity, some of them, and the annuli on them are not terribly reliable either once they've been in a captive setting. So.
Okay. There's a question about whether you use drones at all for either monitoring the tortoises or actually even to help identify release areas.
Take it away, Brett.
So currently we're just using drones to map the release sites so we can get a better understanding of habitat value, and the communities can use those maps for whatever purposes that they need. And Hery and the on-ground staff can use those maps to help plan tracking events and things like that. We are looking into figuring out ways to do tracking with the drones. There's one company out there that is currently doing that. It's pretty cost prohibitive, so we're trying to figure out other ways to get that done. We're looking at other methods of tracking as well, as far as like new technologies that are coming out. Because some of these animals are running far enough where we're having trouble finding them, and it's taking a full day or two of just walking in random directions for many kilometers to finally pick up signals on some of these animals. So we're kind of still doing the old school way because it's less expensive, but we are looking at some of the new technologies and trying to figure out how we can incorporate those into this project.
And I would add just on that, just because we're doing kind of some old school tracking methods, there's the bigger reason besides just monitoring the tortoises that we're interested from these reintroductions is having continuous boots on the ground among TSA staff with these communities, because it means a lot when they see TSA representatives there working with them on a regular basis versus if we were just to go once every 6 months or every year to pull data that doesn't have the same impact at the community level, like Hery was mentioning.
Okay.
Someone had posed the question of whether how do we measure long-term impact of communities or long-term success of the community engagement. And let's just make it clear, we're not going to be able to just release tortoises and walk away from these communities. We have to maintain frequent presence and constantly assess their needs and just maintain a dialogue with them. I think that's going to be really important. We can't release tortoises and walk away.
And along those lines, Rick, are there community livelihood support projects that TSA has been involved with and or plans for more of those?
We have some money and grant that we're working on to do some beekeeping, and we're going to be training them in smart technology in terms of how to monitor tortoise populations and pay them to do that. We are looking to partner with community engagement groups that can help us in that area. We're tortoise biologists. We're not community engagement specialists. We're learning, but we need help. And one of the things that I think that we need to improve their health care, their access to water, and their alternative agricultural techniques that will make them more drought resilient. So there's a lot of things we can do. We just have to best assess their needs. And one of the things that's really encouraging to me is when we ask them what they want, every community has said a school, which underscores the value that they put on education. And the second thing they want is, well, since you're building a school, can we have a water cistern? So, when we build a school, we build drainage pipes that go to an underground cistern to store water. So those are the realities of working there.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time. Is that right, Rachel? Anyway, yeah, I'd just like to remind everybody that there's some useful links that have been posted in the chat for everybody to get further information. And I'd really like to thank Rick, Hery, Lala, especially to Brett and Lance for the great presentations. And remind everybody that the future of the tortoises in Madagascar depends on all of us. And thank you for anybody that can help with funding or finding actually more grant possibilities out there. Do you want to say anything, Mark, to close it up?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I've seen the numbers were great. People were really engaged. I see there's lots of questions. We didn't get to all of them, but hopefully we got to most. If you have any questions you want, just send us a question directly and we'll happily answer them. So thank you again. Wish you all well, and thank you for supporting these important programs.